Well, today we are going to take a look at our last two patterns, pattern 9 and pattern 10. Now, typically when kids take grammar class, they typically understand direct and indirect objects. That might be something they've had in the past, even taking some foreign language classes, they've had experience with both direct and indirect objects, which take you up to pattern 8. The pattern 9 and 10 oftentimes is new information from most kids. So let me walk you through what's going on here. So we can see in our pattern, we have a noun phrase 1, which we know is typically going to be our way of saying it's a subject. All right, we've come across that subscript of 1, which typically means that we're going to have either another one or we're going to have some other numbers. And you can see this already that we're going to have some other numbers. But this is our subject. Secondly, we have our verb, which is transitive. So remember, once again, this is not two separate things. We actually have just to be a verb transitive. So don't get thrown off by this little dash here. So this is our transitive verb. Once again, another fancy word for an action verb. Here's noun phrase 2. So remember, as we said, pattern 7, when we introduce the direct object, 7 basically becomes the form for 8, 9, and 10. And 8, 9, and 10 are just variations of 7. So 7 has a direct object. 8 has a direct object and an indirect object. 9 says, okay, now I'm going to give you the direct object, but I'm going to give you something else. So 7, 8, 9, 10 are all kind of together, but 8, 9, 10 are variations of 7. So now we have the direct object. We were anticipating him, so here he is. And so the subscript of 2 lets us know that it's different from the subject. So this is our next noun phrase. We're going to call him the direct object. So he's back in this position. And now we're going to add in this adjective. I want you to see that there's an adjective which is going to be after the direct object. It's not an adjective in front of the direct object, but it's going to be an adjective after the direct object. And we're going to call him the objective complement. And it should ring a bell to you because we've had subject complements before, subject complements. And so this is an object complement. We know the complement basically with an E means it completes. And so what this means is it completes the object. And so before in pattern 3 and pattern 5, I guess even 2 and 4, we had these subject complements, something which completes the subject. So now we're going to be completing the object. And the object that we have to complete is going to be the direct object. All right, so we start off with a basic form. Once again, we have a nice place for our subject, place for our action verb. Straight line doesn't go all the way through, and therefore this becomes our direct object. Nothing has changed. This is what a pattern 7 looks like. This is what a pattern 8 looks like, except we add in the indirect object down here. So it's always the same 3 words going across: subject, action verb, direct object. Now for pattern 9, we're going to add in this adjective. And so just like we saw in earlier diagrams, back in diagram 2 and diagram 4, when we actually had an adjective in the end of the sentence, it's going to be the same. So this final adjective is going to follow the direct object because it modifies it. So just like a predicate adjective in pattern 2 and 4, we're going to place it on the main line after a slanted line. So here's our slanted line, here's this adjective. This slanted line is my way of sort of pointing back. So now it's pointing back to the direct object saying, hey, this adjective, even though he's after the direct object, kind of describes that direct object. And this becomes what we call the objective complement. Let's take a look at an example. All right, so if I said we considered the hobo's odor oppressive, you can almost hear that there are always going to be 4 parts to a pattern 9. So we have the subject, the action verb, the direct object, and now this adjective, this objective complement. So we start off with our basic structure that I'm anticipating. It's a pattern 9. Place for the subject we, action verb considered. I have the hobo's odor. Now there's 3 words here, but we know enough to say, okay, odor is going to be my noun. Hobos is just describing it. It's my determiner in this case. So we have odor. And then now is a perfect place to say, well, we consider the odor oppressive. I'm looking for an adjective. And so in this case, there's the adjective which follows the noun. Right? Everything else should fit underneath it because I found my 4 words going straight across. So I have, it should be the odor and also hobo's owner. I said owner. I said odor. I guess he is the owner of the odor. All right, here we go. Next one. The Steeler fans painted their faces black and gold. All right, so starting off with, I can see already that I'm going to have 2 adjectives. And we've come across those kind of issues before. It's not going to change the pattern. Just because I have 2 adjectives, it's still going to be a pattern 9, meaning I have 4 slots: a subject slot, an action verb slot, a direct object slot, a slanted line, and a slot for my adjectives. I just have 2 of them. And I gave myself a very small nub here. I'm not sure what I was thinking, but I might need that nub. What was I thinking here? All right, so here we go. Fans. It's going to be my subject. Here comes painted. Here is their faces. Let's get faces in here. And our 2 adjectives, black and gold. There we go. Filling in all the extra stuff because now we have the basic form of a pattern 9. These are adjectives, so everything else has to fit underneath here is left over. So we should have the fans. Also, they're Steeler fans. There we go. It's their faces, so let's get there underneath faces. And I should have a conjunction here with the word and. Look at that. I didn't even need that nub. It's perfect as it is. It's a nice looking pattern 9. Last example for you. All right. I find your cooking to be mediocre. This one's a little different, so I'm going to walk you through this one so I can see the basics. I can see that my subject is I, my action verb is find. If I can only find my cursor, there he is, okay. And then here's my direct object, cooking, and then mediocre is my adjective. I'm going to sneeze, perhaps. So if you hear me sneeze in the middle of this video, then you'll know that's what's happening. That makes no sense at all. All right, so here's I as our subject. Here's my action verb, find. Cooking, now, we're not going to get too technical yet, but right now we're going to treat cooking as the direct object because we're going to treat it as a thing. It's an activity. I find cooking. So here is our direct object, and I'm looking for my adjective, which is going to be mediocre. All right, and it'll always make sense to you across the top. It'll sound very choppy. I find cooking mediocre, but basically it should still make a rough sentence for you if you've done it correctly. I'm going to add in that word your. That's the easy part. The hard part's going to be this to be. Let's talk about what this even means. So in English, we have what we call expletives. I have written it down here for you. And Baghead is explaining that when we come across an objective complement, sometimes, not always, but sometimes they will be introduced with what they call an expletive. An expletive in the English language, there's a couple different ones we have. The first ones I'm going to introduce you to are to be and as. To be and as are expletives. An expletive is a structure that we add to a sentence that you don't always need. Sometimes you need it, but most of the time, an expletive you don't need at all. It's just extra. And for that reason, we don't really want to put it literally in the diagram in a solid way because we don't really need it. If you think about it, you could cut it out. You could simply say, I find your cooking mediocre, and you're fine. You don't really have to say the word to be. As a side note, that is the reason why we refer to swear words as expletives, because technically you don't really need them. I guess they make your sentences more colorful, I suppose, but you don't really need them. And the same thing happens here. So most expletives you can cut out of the sentence. So when we build an expletive, what we do is we actually float it. So it's going to float on what we call a satellite. All right. So we have this little structure called a satellite. It's going to float right in front of the word that it actually introduces. So in this case, to be is introducing the adjective mediocre. So I'm going to put it here. I'm going to float it here. And I'll show you what it looks like. This is what a satellite looks like. A satellite has a series of dashes. I have 4 here. You could have 3. You could have 2. You could have 5 if you want to. I don't care how many dashes you have. And then you have a flat line up here. And this is what we call a satellite. And so that expletive is going to sit right on top of here. So if I use the word to be would float there. If I ended up using as an expletive, as would sit here. This is the first of a couple expletives that we have in the English language, to be and as. And those are the only 2 you'll come across in our very first unit. All right, so that's what a pattern 9 looks like in a more complex way with an expletive. All right, let's get out of this and let's go practice pattern 9, everybody.